Hi all, thank you for coming to SETA DC event for today towards the Middle East perspectives on the Arab Spring. Before I start, I just want to start with three our last publications and then go with the discussion. So as you know, many of you know, we have publications in English, but also at the same time we have Turkish publications which do not appear on the agenda of American audience. That's why I just wanted to show these three things to you before I start. The first one is the Türkiye'nin Kürt sorunu hafızası, which is bringing together 35 different reports on Kurdish issue, which have been published in the last 80 plus years of Turkish Republic. And there's a critical reading of this published in a book format. So if anybody is interested in Kurdish issue and wanted to see how different parties, different institutions, different groups saw Kurdish issue throughout the Turkish history, you might want to check out this book. And secondly, we published something else, which is we just started a new series on upcoming Turkish elections, which will happen throughout of June. So we started with the Kurdish Party, Peace and Democracy Party analysis. It's published a couple days ago in Turkish again. And the analysis of other parties will be followed in the next couple of weeks. And also, the last thing is SETA report, which is a report on Arab Spring and basically on Egypt. So we try to analyze what's going on in Egypt and how that would affect Turkish foreign policy, and how would New Egypt and New Turkey work together in the Middle East, what would be the risks and opportunities. So if any of you want to have access to Turkish or you want to check out those things, you can find these out from our website, and you can download those as PDF. And unfortunately, it's not available on PDF, but I can provide you some copies in the next couple of weeks. So after these short introductions, I want to return to our event. And before I start again, I would like to thank Kadir for organizing this event. And also, I would like to welcome to Taha Özsan, who's the Director General of SETA Foundation, who is with us right now. Thank you, Taha, for joining us. We wanted to arrange this discussion because what's going on in the Middle East right now changed the whole game. Now there's a new balance, new people, new actors, new countries, and everybody had to change their position regarding the other issues. So recent upheavals in the Middle East already achieved significant changes. So what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, followed by Libyan conflict and unrest in Bahrain, Yemen, and Syria. So what's going to happen after Syria, for example, in Turkish policy, or what's going to be the Iran's policy on Syria? So we will discuss all these things, trying to present different country perspectives from our panelists. So we have Elliot Hentov from Princeton University. Welcome, Elliot. And we have Matt Duss from Director of Middle East Progres, Center for American Progress. Welcome, Matt, again. Burhanettin Duran from George Mason University and also from Istanbul Sehir University. Thank you for joining us. And Yousef, Munayyer, Executive Director of the Palestine Center. Thank you, Yousef, for joining us. So I will keep my remarks short, and we'll start with Matt to discuss what's going on in the Middle East and what would be the American perspectives, or what would be the new reading of the Middle East, depending on what's going on in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. So needless to say, what's happening in the Middle East right now has come as a real shock to the U.S. foreign policy establishment. I think there was some sense that the status quo was unsustainable. Surprising to some of you who may have followed my work, I do give some credit to the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, for having analyzed that or adopted an analysis that I think was correct in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, which was that for decades the United States had rather cynically supported a number of dictators who in exchange, who were allowed to rule as long as they kept their people down and kept the oil flowing. And I think what we've seen over the past few weeks and months is that the people of the Middle East have, at long last, very decisively rejected this deal. And I think there is a growing realization in the U.S. foreign policy establishment and in this government, in the Obama administration, that we must reject that deal as well. But no one really has a good answer for I mean, I think there's real support in the administration and in this country for democracy in the region, but the question is, what happens between now and then? There's so much that could go wrong. The process of institution building is very complicated, and there are various forks in the road that could lead to troubling situations, both for the people of the region themselves and for the United States and its interests. But just going back to 9/11, I mean, to set the context for at least the American perspective of what's happened. You know, as I said, I agree with the analysis that many in the Bush administration held, that we had bought into a status quo and were invested in it that was producing bad outcomes for the United States. It produced anger at the United States. It produced extremism and terrorist violence, which visited us here at home so disastrously on that day. But unfortunately, I think having landed and arrived at that analysis, the administration's prescription for what to do about this malady actually turned out to be just as bad as the disease, which was to invade and occupy Iraq with the goal of jump-starting regional change and establishing a new democratic Iraq as a model for the region. And it does not seem to have worked out that way. Iraq created a whole host of other problems for the United States. It's kept the United States bogged down for years. It resulted in the deaths and maiming of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians. It created a rallying cry for Al-Qaeda, and I think there's pretty clear evidence that it actually served to handicap the process of democratic change in the region. So President Obama came into office committed not to making the same mistake and reestablishing or rebooting the relationship, if possible, with the peoples of the Middle East. And that question of peoples now, I think, is really what's at question here. Because I think that, in my view, is the key element of what is happening now in the Middle East and the opportunity that this moment presents for the United States, which is for the United States, which for decades has had a relationship with these regimes. We have an opportunity now, I think, to establish a new relationship between the people of the United States and the peoples of these various countries across the region. And that goes to, creating relationships across a range of fronts: cultural, political, religious, scholarly, and not just making the U.S. military the primary point of contact for the United States, as it has been in too many of these countries. So, while I think the Obama administration has moved haltingly, it has treated these situations differently, as I think it should, because the fact is we have different interests with some of these governments, Bahrain being a perfect example, to consider. And while we would love to believe that we can always resolve and reconcile our interests with our values, the fact is we can't always do that. The question is, how do we manage those tensions as ethically and responsibly as possible? I think they could have done a better job. I hope they will start to do a better job. But given the huge implications and the massive shift that these uprisings and this Arab Spring, or what I very much hope will be an Arab Spring, represents for U.S. policy, I find it quite understandable that the administration and the larger foreign policy establishment has moved as slowly and circumspectly as it has. But I think getting to what I said earlier, and I'll just finish up here, is that I think there is realization in the administration and in the larger government that things are going to change. The status quo will never come back, and that's a good thing. But I think there's a lot of trepidation about what happens next, given the tendency of a lot of actors in the region to exploit chaos, as we've seen so violently over the past few years.
Thank you, Matt. I think we will come back to this point of balancing the values and interests with other presentations as well. Now our second speaker is Yousef Munayyer, who is the Executive Director of Jerusalem Fund and the Educational Program and the Palestine Center. So Yousef is going to present us the Palestinian issue and how that was affected through this Arab Spring.
Before I begin, let me just say first, thanks for putting this together and having us here. I should also mention that I'm looking at this situation not simply as an Arab who's looking at Arab revolutions, but also an Arab living in the United States who's watching the process evolve from here, which has been absolutely fascinating. I can't help but believe that the first casualty of the so-called Arab Spring has been this widely held belief in a dichotomy between radicals and moderates that's defined the region. I don't think that has ever really applied, and I think it's even more out of date today. The revolutions that we've seen have created the potential for these states to formulate foreign policy not based on narrowly defined regime interests, but popularly defined national interests, which is something that will definitely reshape the region, and at least has the potential to. Another immediate reaction that I had to all the changes that have taken place was that I couldn't help but feel that this was a second wave of decolonization taking place throughout the region. And constantly thinking of my father throughout the entire time. My father and his generation. The generation that grew up with Nasser and the revolutions of the 50s and the 60s and the upsurge of secular Arab nationalism that took place throughout that period, and the revolutions of my generation, the generation of the people in Tahrir, the generation of Mohammed Bouazizi, and other young Arabs in the streets demanding change today. With the exception of Libya and Syria, where revolts have either continued to be brutally repressed or have devolved into full-scale civil war, regimes which saw major uprisings or overthrows / threats to the regime were American clients. Ben Ali's Tunisia was thought of as the prototypical American client and supporter in the war on terror, practicing rendition, among other things, in support of American efforts in this war. There's no need to discuss the stance of Mubarak's Egypt. Saleh's Yemen, as we learned from WikiLeaks, was very happy to be complicit in American drone attacks on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which was extremely unpopular among people in Yemen. And Khalifa's Bahrain is, of course, as Matt mentioned, the host to the 5th American Fleet, and very much in line with American interests in the region vis-a-vis Iran and so on. But as I think again about my father's generation and my generation, I ask myself now, what has to happen this time for this to go right? What mistakes can we learn from the past? I think it's imperative that Arab civil society guards against the romanticization of these revolutions and focus very much on the institutional development and safeguarding of government in the hands of the people, something that very quickly escaped Arabs in the past. While these uprisings have resulted in a departure of certain figures like Mubarak's and Ben Ali's, real systematic change has yet to be accomplished. Changes, and I think this is really important, in foreign and domestic policy should and will be significant, but they have to be based in popular will and must be cautious at the same time. This goes back to not getting caught up in the romanticization of these revolutions, as I feel major players did in the previous century when, for example, Nasser's Egypt escalated on a war path with Israel while the majority of their troops were tied up in Yemen, causing a 6-day disaster that forever shaped the region, which the region is still trying to get out of. Also, it's perhaps fitting that during this Arab Spring, Osama bin Laden has met his demise, because one of the initial casualties of the Arab Spring was also the demise of bin Ladenism, this idea that radical and violent uprising against a Western presence within the Arab world is the only method for change. And this, of course, was proven wrong by the youth in the street. But at the same time, looking through the prism of history, we have to guard against the resurrection of bin Ladenism as well. And what does this mean? The reason, I believe, in my interpretation of the history, that the region moved so quickly and so decisively towards political Islam, particularly those elements of it that have moved in a radical direction of political Islam, was because of the failure of secular Arab nationalist revolutions and the failure of those revolutions to bring fruit to the legitimate concerns of the people which they claim to represent. Should this Arab Spring go in the direction that secular Arab revolutions of the previous century have gone, we should be very much worried about what the response will be if the legitimate grievances of the people within the region are not met. This has also been a great opportunity to build genuine relations between Arabs and Americans that are built on more than narrowly defined interests. The U.S. media coverage of the Arab Spring, which was fascinating to watch, for the first time put throngs of young Arab Americans in the streets of the Middle East and presented them as protagonists instead of what they're normally portrayed as violent extremists who want nothing but the end of American influence and anything related to Western culture. Arab citizens' desire for freedom and democracy is something that resonates with Americans who viewed this situation very positively. And we know from polling of people in the United States after these revolutions that these were changes that were accepted very positively within the United States. I want to also underscore the importance of new media within the Arab world. And what do I mean by this? While I was watching this all take place throughout the Middle East in the different contexts, whether it was in Egypt or Bahrain or what have you, I was also working on a research project I've been pursuing in the past that is more historical in nature, but in doing so came across an interesting bit of information that really put into perspective how important this new media is. And I just wanted to read a little bit of this to you. In the turn of the previous century, there was a very limited amount of Arab media throughout the Arab world within what was then the Ottoman Empire. And much of that was because of the rules throughout the empire that dictated what was allowed to be reported in this media. And I wanted to give you an example of an edict that came from the Ottoman Sultan at the time to newspaper editors about what was allowed to be printed and what was not allowed to be printed. First and foremost, newspapers must inform the people of the precious health of the Honorable Sultan. They must discuss matters pertaining to the agricultural crops and progress made of trade and industry in the empire. Use of exclamation marks and successive dots may arouse inquiries and speculation, hence they are forbidden. Newspapers are forbidden from publishing any minority or majority opinion of the population concerning the corruption of government officials. They are also forbidden from noting complaints on this matter referred to the Honorable Magnificent Sultan. And four, and perhaps most importantly, the people have no need to be informed of assassination attempts on the kings of foreign countries or of demonstrations held by troublemakers in those countries. The newspapers are totally forbidden from conveying such news to the people. What absolutely shocked me is not so much that this is an edict that was passed down 100 years ago, but how much state-run media in the present day is very much similar to this. And when you realize how refreshing and how revolutionary new media like satellite television, I'm not even talking about Twitter or Facebook or any of that at this point, but the fact that people like, and the stories of people like Mohammed Bouazizi can be reported throughout the Arab world, only then do we really begin to grasp the importance of this media to the Arab world today. I know I'm probably taking up too much time on this, but I want to move to the Arab Spring and Palestine in particular. If this is, in fact, an Arab Spring, one of the first fruits of the harvest could be the potential and lasting agreement between the Palestinian factions of Hamas and Fatah. We know from, again, thanks to WikiLeaks, very much detail about the position of the different principal players within the Egyptian regime towards mediating negotiations between Fatah and Hamas. In fact, Omar Suleiman, who was in charge of security for the Mubarak regime and handled the Hamas-Fatah negotiation portfolio, was quoted as saying Egypt's three primary objectives with the Palestinians were to maintain common Gaza, undermine Hamas, and build popular support for the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. Hardly the kind of language that we'd want to see in an even-handed mediator between two factions, which I think much of the Arab world hoped Egypt would be and hoped Egypt can be into the future. So it is perhaps no surprise then that only a few months after the overthrow of the Mubarak regime, we saw what seems to be a promising reconciliation deal between Hamas and Fatah only a few months after the departure of Mubarak and Suleiman. I think I will save discussion on the particular potential successes of this reconciliation agreement and the potential pitfalls for a Q&A session. But I think it's important to mention this on the Palestine issue. At a moment when American influence in the region is declining, and coupled with an embarrassing handling of a failed peace process now entering 20 years since the Madrid Peace Conference, Arab states and other regional actors are coming into their own and will continue to assert themselves in the region. This provides for us today a fresh opportunity for real change in the Israel-Palestine status quo that could bring about much-needed peace throughout the region. So, I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you, Yousef. Thank you for providing us the politics, the very politics of the Arab Spring and the Palestine issue. So now we will continue with Burhanettin Duran from Sehir University, and he's going to give us a Turkish perspective.
Thank you, SETA, for this event, for this live event. Of course, all of us once again saw that Middle East evolves faster and less predictably than policy makers and academics might expect. Needless to say, the latest events surprised Turkish foreign policy makers as well. As we know, through its policy of zero problem with neighbors, Turkey expected a lot from using trade investments and easing of travel restrictions as instruments to stabilize the geopolitical environment. This was thought as the most stable and the best way of transforming the Middle East. But now, the Arab Spring proved that Turks were also late in grasping the undercurrents at work in the region. Through the Arab revolutions, Turkey is learning that establishing good and cooperative relations with existing regimes is one thing, but building a new regional order is another. These two conflicting goals were expected to be realized in a gradual and peaceful manner. Reconciling these two goals seems to require more than Turkey's regional economic and political integration policies to help Middle Eastern countries transform. On the flip side of the coin, the Tunisian and Egyptian revolutions have brought the idea of Turkish model to the fore. But with Libyan and Syrian cases, expectations of a progressive stability and gradual reform is gone. Turkey is criticized domestically and internationally for its policies in these cases. Turkey sought to strike a balance between cooperative relations with the existing elite and its popular appeal in neighboring societies. Before the uprisings, it was relatively easy to sustain this policy given the legitimacy crisis the Arab leaders were experiencing. With the uprisings, this balance is increasingly difficult to maintain, and the Turkish policymakers seem stuck between responding to the demands of protesters and opposition forces while encouraging the regimes to reform. And so we have a debate on the urgent need of revising Turkey's foreign policy. For example, Turkey's success in improving relations, bilateral relations with Syria was a successful example. Now, the Syrian case constitutes a major dilemma for Turkey in dealing with the tough issues of regime survival and or regime change. These are challenges faced not only by Turkey, but also by all regional and global powers, including the US and the major regional powers, I mean Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Turkey feels threatened by the instability in the region, just like the US does, but the logic is the same: orderly change or progressive stability. For the time being, it would be very early to conclude that Turkey is experiencing a failure or a fall because of these events, especially because of Syrian case. I argue that the leading principles of Turkish foreign policy are still significant, even more significant in this era, and they will prove to be useful in the coming years. Turkey is the only actor who can speak to such diverse groups of actors in the region. Turkey's decision to encourage flows of people, trade, and ideas strengthens the liberal idea of opening and interdependence, having a demonstrative effect on the peoples of the region. But I accept that the application of zero-problem policy should be rethought and revised in accordance with each case. All of us can agree on the fact that Arab risings are the beginning of a long process of transition to stable democracies. It will take long years for even Tunisia and Egypt to consolidate their democracies. And again, we all accept that this process may result in some setbacks, chaos, and even civil wars. Starting from this basic conviction that this spring has created new challenges for all the international and regional actors, I would argue that in spite of the short-term problems of being stuck between pushing the authoritarian regimes for reform and responding to people's call for freedom, Turkey, in the middle and the long run, will contribute to the consolidation of the democratic regimes in these countries. Actually, Turkey is the only consolidated democracy in the region which can serve as an inspiring example for all the stages and parameters of democratic consolidation and economic development. This includes not only constitution-making practices, peaceful transfer of power to new elites, but also some possible political setbacks and crises that may emerge as a result of coalition governments, military influence, and ethnic and sectarian violence. Turkey can offer more systematic assistance on issues ranging from the organization of free and fair elections to the development of administrative and legal structures supportive of a free civil society. As the new democratic governments take popular opinion into account, this is our all wish, Turkey's critical and independent stance towards Western policies in the region, while being integrated with the West, will surely serve as a unique example. Turkey is the leading regional country which will continue to shape this turmoil when the dust settles. The Turkish government has the capabilities of establishing good relations with both secular regimes and new actors, including the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Nahda. This is not only a question of being a model, but also an intellectual vision of a new regional order and effective leadership as well. I want to say a couple of words and some arguments about the possible architecture of the new Middle East. I'm sure Elliot will present a totally different, maybe a competing picture to mine, but it would be a good point for discussion. In the last decade, the Middle East experienced two profound watershed events. I mean, the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the Arab Spring. The first created a political vacuum that was filled by regional powers, such as Iran and Turkey. And to some observers, the Arab Spring is the most important development of this century, with potential consequences greater than 9/11. Today it is no longer, I argue that, it's no longer possible to see the Middle East as divided between two camps, a moderate pro-American camp and a militant pro-Iranian one. One thing is very certain, that these revolutions shape the future of the region in a way that relations and alliances are becoming more complicated and will continue to be more complicated. For example, Iran's position in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, I'm referring to these issues, is anti-statu quo. But in Syria, Iran is defensive and statu quo oriented. The picture is more complicated, I know, but again, I know that all generalizations have their flaws, but they are very attractive, and unfortunately, I cannot escape from this trap, and I will make some generalizations. There appear to be emerging two loose axes, especially for the region of the Fertile Crescent and the Gulf. The first axis seems to be centered on a further sectarian polarization between Sunni and Shias. In this axis, we might see two leading powers. One is US-backed Saudi Arabia as a statu quo power and non-democratic model, and Iran as an anti-American, anti-statu quo power which tries to establish a resistance bloc to weaken the US and its allies in the region. Given the non-violent and democratic revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, it seems that there can be another axis which might reject sectarian polarization, anti-Americanism, and might promote diplomacy, democracy, democratic reform, and economic integration for the solution of regional problems. Turkey and the new Egypt, as the representatives of the new Arab world, might be the cooperative actors in this new axis. The existence of such a new axis might contribute to the softening of the growing sectarian tensions and possible radicalism of disillusioned youth in the region. The recent agreement on establishing a technocratic national unity government between Fatah and Hamas can be regarded as one positive result of this cooperation. Saudi support to Sunni elements in Syrian uprising and the Iranian involvement in Bahrain are the examples of growing sectarian polarization. Turkey's non-sectarian approach and possible Egyptian cooperation can be some further steps to decrease the tensions in the region. In this picture, lastly, the positions of the US and Israel are very important. If Washington prefers to focus only on the containment of the threat of Iran and continue to support the sectarian policy of Saudi Arabia, this will help escalate polarization in the region, and the new Middle East will be a place for further conflicts, radicalism, anti-Americanism, and civil wars. Such a policy would be a reincarnation of the old failed policy, support autocratic regimes in the name of preventing fundamentalism and radicalism. I think the US should support Turkey and New Egypt in order to create a new regional order which contains radicalism and polarization by promoting democratic reforms and peace. Of course, certainly, including the Israeli-Palestinian peace. My last word is, a call for justice and dignity is driving the Arab awakening. It should not be a nightmare of guns and disillusionment. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Burhanettin, for providing us your views on the regional order and how would this Arab Spring would affect the relationship between the third countries in the region. And now our last speaker is Elliot Hentov. First of all, Elliot, congratulations for your recent PhD. And then Elliot is going to provide us an account of Turkish-Iranian relations and how that's what affects the Arab Spring, or how it is affected from those relations.
Lou, thank you for your congratulations, and thank you for having me here today. I'll start off unusually with saying that I partially agree with what my colleague here presented. There's changes obviously coming to the region, not only domestically, but the regional order of the Middle East will be changing. For Iran, that's important because Iran has defined itself for 30 years since the revolution as being as the leader of the resistance, or in opposition to the existing order that took place in the Middle East. The question is, how will this change take place, and how will it affect Tehran and its outlook? Initially, when Tunisia and the Egyptian protests took hold, there was a hubris in Tehran that this wave of collapse of these ossified, Western-backed regimes would provide finally the opening for Iran to expand its solidarity with its Arab brethren and religious kin. I think now, with Libya and Syria and other regimes in question, I think that hubris has given way to a clear recognition that there's uncertainty and that the risks are equally grave for Iran as they are for perhaps the West or for its opponents. As a result, Iran is now seeking to try to shape the outcome of these revolutions as much as it can. It has great ambitions for the Arab Spring. Number one, it hopes to decrease its regional isolation. At times it's controversial to declare Iran an isolated country, but that's what it is. We forget that despite having deep ties in very specific places, such as Iraq, in Lebanon, and a few others, for the most part, Iran is an isolated country on the world stage. The Arab awakening is perhaps viewed in Tehran as an opening to break out of that isolation and to rebuild ties. Foremost, to rebuild ties with regimes that were part of the anti-Iranian alliance or the anti-Iranian axis, such as Egypt. So